My mother's crushing words. You'll never get a job. How I'm fighting to prove her wrong. On the brink of giving up, my mother's harsh words cut deep, leaving me to wonder how I can keep fighting when the person I need most believes in me the least. I was sitting at my desk surrounded by stacks of banking exam preparation materials. My head was heavy with the weight of the books and the pressure to succeed. At 22, I had this overwhelming sense of responsibility on my shoulders, feeling like the whole world was watching and waiting for me to fail. I had dreamed of a stable, secure life, one that didn't include the constant worry and fear that had been a part of my existence since childhood. And this exam, the one I had been preparing for months, was supposed to be my ticket out of the chaos. My mother, who had always been the most constant person in my life, had become the one person I longed for support from the most. She was the one person I thought would understand the weight I was carrying. The one person who I believed would reassure me that everything would be okay. But that morning, everything changed. It was a Saturday, the weather had a slight chill to it, and I had just finished a mock exam. I felt mentally drained, but my heart was determined to push through. I had no choice. This exam was everything. If I didn't pass, I would be stuck in a job I hated, a life I didn't want, and the crushing weight of failure would just get heavier with each passing day. As I walked out of my room exhausted but hopeful, I saw my mother in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She looked up when she heard me enter, and for a moment I thought she was going to ask how the mock exam went, or give me some encouraging words. But instead, her eyes seemed colder than usual, and she said something that shook me to my core. "You'll never get a job," she muttered, almost as if it was a casual statement. "You'll never be successful. You'll always struggle." I stopped in my tracks. My stomach dropped. Was this some kind of cruel joke? She had never spoken to me like that before. Yes, there had been moments where she was frustrated, especially when things didn't go well, but never like this. I stood there motionless, trying to process the words she had just said. "Excuse me?" I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. She didn't even look up from what she was doing, stirring the eggs in the pan as if nothing had happened. "You heard me? You're not cut out for this. You'll always struggle. You'll end up just like your friends who don't have anything going for them. And you'll be stuck in that same place forever." Her words hit like a slap to the face. It wasn't just the cruelty of what she said, but the tone. It was final, as if she had already decided my fate. My hands shook at my sides. I felt my throat tightening, the tears threatening to come out. But I couldn't let them. Not yet. Not in front of her. I had always thought my mother was my rock. She had been through so much, and I had admired her strength growing up. But right now, she wasn't showing me strength. She wasn't showing me support. She was showing me a side of her I had never seen before. The side that doubted me. The side that believed I would never be good enough. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could say something like that to me. How she could be so cruel when I was doing everything I could to change my life. But instead, I just stood there feeling small and insignificant. "You're just like the rest of them," she continued, still not looking at me. "Always comparing yourself to others, thinking you're different. You're not. You'll always be stuck, always be struggling." The words sliced through me. I had spent years feeling like I was on the verge of something great, like I was just about to break through the surface of the water and breathe. But now I felt like I was sinking. Like the weight of my mother's expectations, her doubts had just pulled me deeper into the darkness. I wanted to run out of the house, to escape her words, to find a place where I could just breathe without feeling like I was drowning. But I couldn't. I stayed there frozen, unable to speak. The silence between us felt like it was suffocating me. Finally, she looked up, her expression almost unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said, but there was no real apology in her voice. It was more of a resignation, a sense that she had said what she needed to say, and now it was over. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The lump in my throat was too big to swallow. So I turned and walked back to my room, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I sat on my bed, I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came pouring out, and I let them. I let the sadness, the anger, and the disappointment flood out of me. But it wasn't just the hurt from her words that stung. It was the realization that I had been hoping for something from her, something I wasn't sure I could ever get. I had always believed my mother would be my biggest supporter, the one person who would stand by me no matter what. But today, she had crushed that belief, and now I felt completely alone. How could I possibly keep going when the one person I thought would always be there for me had just told me I would never amount to anything? How could I keep striving for success when the person who was supposed to lift me up had just torn me down? I didn't have the answers. I didn't even know how to handle it. But what I did know was that everything felt different now. My mother's words had changed everything, and now I was left wondering if I could ever repair the relationship with the one person who had always been the closest to me. I spent the next few hours in my room processing everything that had just happened. My mind was racing, filled with a whirlwind of thoughts. How could she say something like that to me? Was she right? Was I really just destined to fail? I kept replaying her words over and over in my mind, each time feeling more and more like I wasn't good enough. The sting of her rejection was still fresh, like an open wound that wouldn't heal no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. As the day went on, I tried to focus on my studies. I knew I had to. The banking exams were coming up and I couldn't afford to fall behind. But every time I opened my books, my mind drifted back to my mother's words. She was right about one thing: there were always those comparisons. The ones that seemed so innocent at first, but ultimately left me feeling inadequate. I had always been the one who tried to keep up, to stay motivated. I looked at my friends, their lives seemingly falling into place with ease. They were excelling in their careers, securing stable jobs right out of university while I was still stuck. My closest friend had been working at a top firm for almost a year now, and here I was still struggling with exams, barely scraping by. But it wasn't just the career comparisons that hurt. My mother always made it clear how proud she was of my friends, how she wished I could be more like them. Every time she mentioned how successful they were, it felt like she was pointing out everything I wasn't. Every time she praised them for their achievements, I was left to question my own worth. What was wrong with me? Why couldn't I be like them? It wasn't as if I wasn't trying. I had worked so hard to get to this point, fighting through doubts and fears. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't seem to live up to the standards my mother set. I felt like I was constantly failing to meet her expectations, always falling short of her ideal. Her disappointment in me had become a weight I carried everywhere. Even the smallest failure seemed to add to it, confirming what she had said, that I would never be successful, that I would always struggle. I started to feel overwhelmed by the burden of comparison. It wasn't just my mother who was doing it, it was everyone. Everyone seemed to have their lives together while I was still trying to find my footing. I kept thinking that if I could just pass these exams, everything would fall into place. But with each failure, each setback, I was starting to wonder if I was just kidding myself. What if I never passed the exams? What if I never made it? At that moment, I began to question everything I had worked for. Was I doing the right thing? Was this even what I wanted anymore? Every time I looked at the path ahead, it felt like a long, impossible climb, one that I wasn't sure I had the strength to complete. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the pile of textbooks that had once seemed like a lifeline. Now they felt like an anchor, pulling me deeper into a sea of self-doubt. I tried to push through it, I really did. But every time I opened those books, I felt like a failure. I couldn't escape the feeling that I would never be able to live up to the expectations set for me, not by my mother, not by society, and not even by myself. But then I had a moment of clarity. A small voice inside me told me that I couldn't keep comparing myself to others, that my journey was my own and no one else's success could define mine. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew there were going to be times when I felt lost, when I questioned everything, but I couldn't let the comparisons control my life. I had to find my own path, even if it wasn't the same as everyone else's. The problem was, even with that realization, I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother's words were true, that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be good enough for her. And that hurt. It hurt more than I could put into words. The one person I thought would always be there to support me had just told me that I would never succeed. She had made me feel like I was always going to fall short, and that was the hardest thing to accept. That night, I cried myself to sleep, not just because of her words, but because I felt completely and utterly alone. I had tried so hard to keep going, to push through the darkness, but in that moment, it felt like I was drowning. It felt like there was no one left to turn to, no one left to help me get back up. I wanted my mother's support more than anything in the world, but it seemed like she was the one person I couldn't count on. I knew I had to keep fighting, that I couldn't give up, but it was hard. It was really hard. I wasn't just fighting for a job or an exam. I was fighting for my worth. I was fighting to prove that I wasn't the failure she seemed to think I was. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could keep fighting like this. I didn't know if I had the strength left to continue. And the worst part was, I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I would never be good enough. The days after the confrontation with my mother blurred together. Every day felt like a battle, one I didn't know how to fight anymore. I woke up each morning with a sense of dread, knowing I had to face another day of pretending everything was okay, when deep down I was falling apart. I couldn't escape the weight of my mother's words, and each day it seemed to get heavier. I was still studying for my banking exams, but now it all felt pointless. I started to wonder if I was even doing it for the right reasons. Was I trying to get a job for myself, or was I just trying to prove my mother wrong? I knew I needed to make changes to focus on myself, but the loneliness I felt was suffocating. No matter how hard I tried to talk to my friends to distract myself with anything, there was this overwhelming sense that no one truly understood what I was going through. It wasn't just about the exams anymore, it was about everything. It was about the fact that I felt completely unseen. The thing was, I had always been a strong person, or at least I used to think I was. I had always been the one to help others, to listen, to encourage, but now I felt like I had no one to turn to. I couldn't talk to my mother because she was the one who had hurt me the most. And I couldn't talk to my friends because deep down, I felt like they had everything figured out. They didn't need to know about my failures. They didn't need to hear about how lost I felt. So I kept it all to myself, bottling up the pain until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started to realize that what I truly wanted was validation. Not necessarily from my friends, but from my mother. I wanted her to see me, to acknowledge that I was trying, that I was doing my best, even if it didn't look like I was succeeding. But that validation was never coming. All I got were comparisons and criticisms. She never once asked me how I was doing or if I needed help. She just assumed I was fine, even though I was struggling so much inside. I thought about how I had always dreamed of having a close relationship with my mother. Growing up, I had looked up to her as the person who would always have my back. But now that support felt so distant. She was supposed to be my rock, the one person who would always cheer me on. But all I got were harsh words, words that cut deeper than anything I had ever heard. I wanted her to believe in me, to see my worth, but it felt like she only saw my failures. And that made everything feel so much worse. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that I was letting myself down. I kept thinking about my friends, how they had managed to make their lives work while I was stuck. They were all moving forward, starting careers, getting married, having families while I was here, still struggling with my exams and trying to figure out who I was. It felt like I was falling further behind every single day, and it seemed like no one noticed. I would often lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I was doing wrong. I felt like I was stuck in this endless loop of self-doubt, unable to break free. I thought about quitting, about giving up on everything. What was the point of trying if I couldn't even get the support I needed? What was the point of fighting for a future that felt so uncertain and distant? But even in the midst of all this despair, there was a part of me that couldn't give up. I wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. I knew deep down that I had the potential to do something great, to prove to myself that I was capable. But that didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. I still felt like I was carrying this burden on my own, and it was exhausting. Sometimes I would try to reach out to friends to open up about my struggles, but the conversation would always turn back to their lives. They would talk about their jobs, their relationships, their accomplishments, and I would sit there silently, pretending to be happy for them, while my heart sank deeper into despair. It wasn't their fault. I was happy for them. But it was hard to hear about their successes when I felt so far removed from my own. One evening, I decided to talk to my mother again. Maybe I could explain how her words had hurt me. Maybe I could finally make her understand. But when I brought it up, she dismissed it, telling me that I was just being too sensitive. That made me feel even worse. I wanted to scream at her to make her see the depth of the pain she had caused me. But instead, I just nodded and walked away, feeling even more invisible than before. I started to realize something in that moment. The validation I was desperately seeking from my mother wasn't something she was going to give me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make her see me the way I wanted to be seen. And as much as that hurt, it was a truth I had to accept. I knew I had to find another way to validate myself, to believe in my own worth without needing anyone else's approval. But that was easier said than done. I had spent so much of my life looking to others for reassurance that learning to validate myself felt like an impossible task. It was going to take time, but I realized that I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to make me feel better. As I sat there in my room that night, feeling the weight of my loneliness, I knew that I had to start putting myself first. I had to stop relying on others to fill the void inside of me. It was going to be a long journey, but I knew that if I could start believing in myself, I would eventually find the strength to overcome everything. But for now, I was still struggling, and it was okay to admit that. I was slowly beginning to understand that the world wasn't going to change for me. No amount of waiting or hoping that things would magically get better was going to work. If I wanted things to change, I was going to have to make the change myself. It was a hard pill to swallow. For so long, I had relied on others, on my mother, on my friends, on the world around me, to make me feel valued, to make me feel loved. But that wasn't going to be the key to my happiness. I was the one who had to find my worth, not anyone else. But how could I start? The question kept swirling around in my mind. I felt so lost. Every day was a struggle to find motivation, and every step forward felt like 2 steps back. How could I begin to believe in myself when all I had known for so long was failure and disappointment? I decided that the first step was to focus on something I had always been passionate about, something that had always given me a sense of purpose, before the weight of my mother's words crushed my spirit. I had always loved reading, especially books about personal growth, self-help, and empowerment. So I went to the bookstore one weekend and bought a few books that I thought might help me reframe my mindset. It was a small step, but it felt like the right one. As I read through those pages, I started to slowly realize that everything I was feeling, everything I had been struggling with, wasn't unique to me. I wasn't the only person in the world to experience self-doubt, loneliness, and rejection. And the more I read, the more I realized that I had the power to change my mindset, to shift the way I viewed myself and my life. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. I started applying the principles I was learning to my daily life. I made small changes. I woke up earlier, set achievable goals for my studies, and began meditating to clear my mind. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was a start, and that was enough for me. I couldn't change everything overnight, but I could take one step at a time. One of the most powerful lessons I learned was the importance of self-compassion. I had spent so many years beating myself up over my perceived failures that I had forgotten how to be kind to myself. I realized that the only way to move forward was to treat myself with the same love and understanding that I would offer to a friend who was struggling. Instead of criticizing myself for not being perfect, I learned to celebrate my small victories, no matter how insignificant they seemed. The changes weren't instant, but they were real. I started to feel more grounded. I began to see myself differently, not as a failure, but as someone who was actively working towards something better. I still struggled, of course. I still had days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I would ever make it. But those moments were fewer and farther between. I had started to build the foundation of self-belief, and that was the most important thing. But even as I made progress, there were still moments when I felt the sting of my mother's words. There were still times when I longed for her support, for her to see that I was trying. I couldn't completely shake the hurt of her rejection, but I was learning to cope with it. I realized that I had to stop seeking validation from her. It wasn't fair to place that burden on her, and it wasn't healthy for me. My mother had her own struggles, and her harsh words were a reflection of her own pain. I couldn't take them personally anymore, no matter how much they had hurt me. One day I was sitting at my desk, reviewing for my banking exams, when I received a message from my mother. It was short and simple. "I'm proud of you." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I had no idea what prompted this message, but I felt a wave of warmth wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't need to ask for validation. I had already started to believe in myself, and her message was just the icing on the cake. It was a small gesture, but it meant more to me than anything. It wasn't the answer I had been searching for, but it was a step in the right direction. I realized that maybe things were going to be okay. My relationship with my mother might never be perfect, but that didn't define me. My worth was not tied to anyone else's opinion of me. I had learned to take responsibility for my own happiness, and that was the greatest gift I could give myself. With newfound clarity and strength, I dove back into my studies with a renewed sense of purpose. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I was starting to see the path forward. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to walk it. The months passed, and each day felt like a little victory. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but I was closer than I had ever been. My studies for the banking exams were becoming more manageable, and I had stopped doubting myself as much. It was as though the fog had lifted from my mind, and I was able to see my potential clearly for the first time in years. Still, despite my progress, there were days when I couldn't shake off the feelings of inadequacy. I had always been the person who felt like I wasn't enough, whether it was because of my mother's words or because of the high standards I set for myself. But now I was starting to understand that it wasn't about perfection. Life wasn't about never making mistakes or always being at the top of your game. It was about resilience. It was about picking yourself up after each failure and moving forward. One evening, I sat with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything I had gone through. It wasn't just the disappointment from my mother's harsh words that had defined me. It was how I chose to respond to them. For so long, I had lived in the shadows of others' expectations, but now I was learning to step into the light of my own. My mother's words were still in my mind, and they still hurt, but I no longer allowed them to dictate who I was. It was ironic those words had been so powerful in keeping me stuck for so long, yet they also served as the catalyst for my growth. In the past, I had sought validation from others because I thought it would fill the empty space inside me. But I now realized that the validation I had been searching for was already inside me. I had to learn to recognize it, embrace it, and believe in it. My relationship with my mother had not improved drastically, but there was something different now. I wasn't angry with her anymore. I had stopped blaming her for everything that had gone wrong in my life. The truth was, she was struggling too. She had her own fears and doubts, and sometimes those emotions came out in ways that hurt me. But that wasn't her fault. We were both learning. We were both healing. The next time I saw her, I didn't expect anything to change overnight. But as we sat together, I felt a shift. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it was significant. She didn't say anything extraordinary, but I could sense the quiet understanding between us. I had stopped needing her approval to feel good about myself, and because of that, I was finally able to see her for who she truly was, not as a source of pain, but as a person who had her own struggles, just like me. The exams were approaching, and I was filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The thought of failing again haunted me, but for the first time in years, I wasn't terrified of it. I knew that no matter what happened, I would be okay. I had already faced the worst, my own self-doubt, my fear of failure, my mother's rejection, and I had come out stronger. No exam result could define my worth anymore. When the day of the exams arrived, I was calm. For the first time, I wasn't anxious. I walked into the room with a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in so long. I had studied hard, and I knew I had given my best. Whatever happened next, I was proud of myself. I wasn't the same person who had doubted her every step. I was stronger, more confident, and more aware of my own value. A few weeks later, when the results were posted, I opened the email with a racing heart. I had passed the exams. It wasn't just a victory over the exams themselves, but over everything I had fought through to get to that point. I wasn't just celebrating my success in passing. I was celebrating the fact that I had finally stopped letting my fears control me. I called my mother to share the news. It wasn't the kind of phone call where I expected a grand celebration, but she sounded proud of me. "I knew you could do it," she said. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need her approval to feel proud of myself. I had already learned to believe in my own strength. Her words were just the cherry on top. Looking back, I could see the journey I had taken and how far I had come. The pain, the struggle, the doubts, they had all been a part of my story, but they no longer defined me. What defined me now was my resilience, my determination, and the belief I had in myself. I was ready for the future, ready to take on whatever came next. I had learned the most important lesson of all, that I am enough, just as I am, and that no matter what anyone else says, I will never stop trying to become the best version of myself. If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. If you want more heartfelt stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything.